Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. So I just watched episode 7 in the dub. Still hurt. Man, this was painful. Like, I felt for Naomi dying. I really did. I know we're supposed to root for Light as our protagonist, but I was watching the dub, and it's funny because at first I wasn't liking the man that plays Light. I wasn't liking his performance as much as Miyano Mamoru at first, because he's just Brad, whatever his name is. I don't want to look it up because I don't want to be spoiled by anything. But his voice acting as Light is very it's very upbeat. It's not like quite as condescending as Miyano makes it in the Japanese. It just sounds more like a high school student, honestly. And at first, it wasn't as Light in the Japanese original voice cast. Miyano makes him quite sinister in the last episode, just trying to work through everything. And in the dub, he sounds a little it just sounds too boyish isn't the right word, but it wasn't gelling with me until the part where he changes over to Kira and kills her. And at that point, the guy that does the voice acting for Light for the English dub, at that point, when he did the whole condescending, he's like, "Don't you want to talk to my dad?" The way he said it was the creepiest thing I've ever heard. And I was like, oh, it was just so terrifying. And the girl that voiced Naomi was really good too. So yeah, it was great. I was like, oh, okay. Whenever the guy Brad that plays Light in English dub, whenever he turns it over to Kira, you feel it. There's a transition, and it's just, it was a lot. That last episode was a lot. Yep, so I've got some comments before we start episode 8, but whole episode 7, that was a doozy. A doozy, and we're only 7 episodes in. We still got 30 episodes to go. We're just getting started. Ugh. So it's pretty crazy, right? Yeah, we're barely even a fourth of the way through at this point, right? So crazy times. Mezzo in episode 4... Mezzo back in episode 4 talked about how Light wrote that the bus hijacker would fire all the bullets at Ryuk. So that's why Light was not worried about him basically causing, because he specifically wrote that he would use all the bullets on Ryuk. So thank you for clarifying that, Mezzo. And then Robin Hood Productions point out this really interesting thing about how Light frequently, he uses women and he punishes them. Case in point, Naomi and Yuri back in episode 4. But at the same time, he seems especially apt on punishing those that abuse women. So we saw the woman in the convenience store in the first episode, or the second episode, and then it was the first. And then we've seen how he's went after the coffee shop owner that was a sexual predator. And so Robin Hood Productions was talking about maybe the reason that he is so fixated on punishing those individuals is because it's tied to his sister. Maybe he has a little sister. Maybe that's part of it. I thought that was interesting. But he still uses and kills women. So it's but I still think it's an interesting conversation. And maybe as we go through the series, more on that will get picked up. So that's just good to note. The truck talked about how the manga, just showing the difference between the manga and the anime. And the anime is very dark. The colors are dark, the shading is dark. The last episode, leading up to Naomi dying, it just gets all very gray tones and muted. And the truck noted that in the manga, it's much more white space and the use of lighting, and it almost seems more pure and innocent, the manga does, which is fascinating. I'm not going to react to the manga, but I may go back and read it after I'm done watching the series just for fun. So that'll be interesting to see. In contrast, Be Happy talked about how Light and L are similar, and that Chief Yagami may view L like his own, with a more fatherly perspective, because L reminds him of his son. So I was like, oh, that's really interesting that Chief Yagami, since Naomi kind of reveals that her thoughts on L and Light being similar, maybe Chief Yagami thinks the same things, and that's kind of why he acts that way towards L, which kind of ties down to Alexander Q's comment. Alexander Q was commenting about how Light and his dad seem estranged, but I honestly don't see it. I don't. I feel like Light and his dad, I don't think they have a tense relationship. I literally think that his dad is a working parent. And I know that a lot of people have commented about how some of Light's behavior may be tied to how he's always being pushed to be academic. I mean, his mom so far in the series has been the main one that's pushed for him to be academically successful. The mom's the one that's always asking about the test scores. I mean, the dad brings up at dinner, but Light doesn't really have any other hobbies, but it's not his fault for being academic. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, my parents expected me to get all A's through school and I'd get grounded if I got a B, but I'm not killing people. So if I had the death note, I don't think I'd kill people for that reason. I don't know. I didn't see him and his dad having a strained relationship at all. I feel like his dad is just a working dad on a police force. It could be any other job. And yeah, he may not have a lot of time with his family, but his family clearly loves him and there's no resentment there. So I don't know. I don't see it personally, but if somebody else sees it, that's fine. I mean, it's cool if you do. I just personally don't see it. But again, things may change as we go forward in the series and we get more. I think we're going to get more with Light and his dad as we go on, and maybe my opinions will change. But for right now, and I don't want any spoilers, for right now, I don't see any tension really between him and his dad, except that his dad clearly thinks that Kira is evil, but doesn't know it's his son who he loves. So it's like, well, that's going to be heartbreaking if he finds out in more ways than one. And then Thea Martin talked about how Light viewing grayness. I really like this conversation about how Light views grayness as how criminals have exploited the system, and it leads him to have a more black and white mentality towards justice. And anybody that has that same grayness or does not have that black and white mentality that Light has is also part of that injustice. So I'm like, okay, so that makes a little more sense why Light has such high absolute viewpoints about justice and doesn't really have room for moral grayness, because he ties it to the injustice of the system itself. I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I really like that, Thea Martin. That was a really cool conversation. And then Alexander, your comment, and that's fine if people think there's that relationship. I just thought it was interesting because I don't see it. But again, I'm coming at it from a different perspective. So that's interesting that it's brought up. Vanna Kirch pointed out that butterflies are the symbol of spirits departing to the afterlife. So the belt buckle that Light has in the OP with the butterfly may be more symbolic than literal. That makes a lot of sense. And then finally, some dude noted that in interviews, the mangaka has said that L sits like that because that's how the mangaka sits while creating manga. I'm like, that's a few notes about that. One, that's pretty cool that the author is inserting themselves in L, and kind of relates, as some dude pointed out, to the fact that the mangaka uses an alias as well, like L and like Light to an extent. But also, the way that he sits, like, on his knees, on his, like crouched down in a seat, that sounds like the most uncomfortable position to do manga. Like, I don't think I could sit like that for more than 5 minutes without my back hurting or something. So, kudos to the mangaka for being able to sit like that. That sounds horribly uncomfortable. But also, some dude talked about that line back in episode 6, the whole thing about beating L. And that when Light was talking to the guard there at the police station, and Naomi overheard him, and he was like, oh, finally I'll get a chance to beat L. What that could mean, it could mean, yeah, literally beating L, or beating L to solving the case. And some dude talked about how Light is very egotistical, so it could be one of those like kind of double meaning things where what he means is, yes, I really want to beat L and destroy him, but what he's actually doing is saying, oh, I want to beat L, and trying to convince the police force and Naomi that he wants to beat L at solving the Kira case first, getting her to kind of build some trust with him, or at least question and talk to him. And that way he can kind of steer the conversation and try to get more information out of her. So that makes a lot more sense. I like that a lot. That's pretty cool. But yeah, last episode was bonkers. I don't see it getting any saner from here. I had lots of thoughts about the last episode. It's still pretty chilling to me. We're rewatching the dub like 10 minutes ago. I was like, whew. It's just a heavy episode. And I feel like it's the tip of the iceberg. What have you all signed me up for? So I guess we'll find out, right? I guess we'll find out. I've got like my Mr. Rogers sweater on. Like, good vibes, right? Surely nothing bad will happen. But let's not waste any more time, shall we? We've done 10 minutes worth already. So we're going to start episode 8 of Death Note here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. It's over. Okay. Yeah, this episode was amazing. The episode, The Rule of 8, has not let me down. 8's my lucky number, and I was like, I don't know how this 8th episode's gonna go, and it was freaking glorious. I've never seen a potato chip eaten so dramatically in all of my days. Oh, so many surprises in this episode. Just so many surprises. And here's the thing about Light's ego. The dude's ego, it's endearing. It's become endearing just how much Light is like, you think you've got me? Screw you, you don't. It's like, this show does the weirdest thing, and several of you have commented about it, that even if you don't agree with what Light is doing, and I don't, there's just something about him that you almost root for him, and you don't want him to be found out. But at the same time, you want Elle. Elle is so freaking close. He is right there. He just needs one thing only, and he will have, and he'll have Light. He just needs that one clue, and he is so close every episode. He's just like one step away. Like if Light missteps an inch, he's done. And also poor Ryuk. Poor Ryuk. Never have I seen a death god treated so poorly as Ryuk, being denied his apples. I have a sneaking suspicion about that whole withdrawal symptom thing. I have a sneaking suspicion of what's going to happen with that, but we're not there yet. But I have a suspicion of what's going to happen, but we shall see. We'll see if that actually comes to fruition or not. But man, yeah, Chief Yagami, Elle, Light, Ryuk, everything, just the links in which things happen in this episode, and just the oddities and just crazy stuff, right? But yeah, I had to bring Whiteboard Coon out because we needed to talk about this episode, and I want to get past the, I want to see if anything changed actually through this, because we now see Watari, right? So we see him looking through the apple, and we see, did anything change other than Watari? We see this girl that we haven't met yet. We now see Watari with the L symbol. We know Ray and Naomi. We see the death gods. We see all the stuff here. Nothing else seems like it changed in the OP, but that's interesting. Okay. So yeah, so we're cutting to the footage we got here. We got all the videotape screens and that was coincidentally captured on surveillance cameras that details the FBI who died in Japan. So looking at the surveillance footage to try to gather any information. And they've literally been looking at these VHS tapes over and over again to try to piece things together. So let's talk about Ray and Naomi. All right, we're going to talk about Ray and Naomi. Our poor FBI victims that Light got rid of. So also, the ice cream that's being eaten here in this scene is kind of hilarious. I feel like since it's green, it's matcha. And if you've ever had matcha, like I love matcha green tea and I love matcha lattes and things like that. Matcha is a very odd taste. It's a very odd flavor. Some people think it tastes like grass, and it does have a very earthy taste to it. You either like it or you don't. The fact that all of them eat the matcha ice cream that Watari gives them, either they all have similar tastes or Watari is too much of a cinnamon bun for them to turn them down. So they're like, no, we'll eat it. But what did Matsuda say here? He said he rides the Yamanote line, and they're all trying to stay awake. It's been so long. Even if he was following someone, it would be difficult to conclude anything from this blurry video. Yep. And then at 16:42, and he gives him that. Oh, thank you very much. Like, thanks for the ice cream at midnight. He gets off and dies in the Tokyo Station platform. I feel like the ice cream is matcha flavored because matcha has caffeine in it. And so maybe Watari's like, this is how you're going to stay awake. And L's just like, and L has like the crazy bags under his eyes. Like he's just stayed away. Like those guys have bags under their eyes, but L has them to an extreme. So let's go up here and do L versus Light. Let's go up here and do L slash Ryuzaki versus Light slash Kira. Okay. And get them on here. So L seems kind of like he's an insomniac. Hence the matcha ice cream. He seems like he's an insomniac. I feel like even though we see how similar Light and L are, there are some very distinct differences between them. So you have L, who's kind of an insomniac, versus Light, who has a very strict routine with his sleep schedule. Like Light keeps it down to a T, which he established way back in like the first couple episodes, whereas L seems like an insomniac. He seems like he just like obsesses over something and pours himself into it, right? I also like that Watari gives Chief Yagami 3 scoops instead of 2 like the rest. He clearly likes Chief Yagami best. It's great. And so L is like, okay, look, And it's kind of gross the way he used his teeth on the ice cream. I'm like, oh, L. Cannot, teeth too sensitive, can't bite into ice cream. Gross. But so he tells Aizawa and Matsuda and them, judging by the footage, from the time that Ray, he'd only been writing for an hour. He had been writing for an hour and a half, but the line only takes an hour. He was on it longer than he needed to be. So that's clue number one, is that he was on the train longer than the route. Okay. And I don't think that Light intended for that to be something that would pop up. I don't think Light paid any attention to that. No. And then the envelope is strange. So then they talk about the envelope, and they're like, oh yeah, so the envelope that he leaves with and arrives with and does not leave with. So that's clearly something that, and I don't think Light anticipated any of this either. I don't think that Light anticipated they would look at this footage and find that information. And so it is on the list of the articles he left behind, which means he left it on the train. And this video of Penbar's final moments make it seem like he's desperately trying to look inside the train. Yeah. So I wonder if even Ray knew from beyond the grave, if Ray knew that it was being filmed and he was trying to do something. And so this is interesting. Chief Yagami says, well, wait a minute. Why would Kira be on the train with Ray and expose themselves potentially when they can kill from a distance? Why would they do that? And so they don't realize the full potential of the Death Note yet, so they haven't put two and two together of what all Light is capable of. And L admits, he's like, well, I don't think he would either. It doesn't seem to make sense for him to be right there with Ray at his death when he could do it from a safe distance. But despite that, he may have tried something bold. And the light under his eye, like the bags under his eyes, and just how dead Ryuzaki's eyes look. It's curious. It's curious. And he's just sitting there eating like he's such a weirdo. Yeah, it's odd because L is, if I go back to my purple here, L is this eccentric and weird. Whereas Light has the persona of being polished and a perfectionist. And seemingly normal. It's that normalcy that he puts on. So they're very different in that regards of how they project themselves in front of everybody. Yeah. And then I like Watari's just hanging out with ice cream too. I just imagine Watari and L having ice cream parties. Again, I feel like it makes L seem like such a child in some ways because he has the ice cream, which is usually something that seems kind of kiddish. So that's kind of, it's distinct. It's more like L is but it's very full of sugar. So youthful versus mature. Which granted, both are extremely intelligent. So we'll put that up here for both of them. But yeah, it's just the sugar cravings. It seems very kind of kiddish, whereas Light kind of passes off having this maturity about him. And then, so Ryuk gets on to Light saying, you've been writing criminals' names in the Death Note for 4 days already without sleeping. He's like, why do you have to set up a death schedule for several months ahead? And this is smart. It's smart. Light saying, well, what happens if something happens to me? What if I get hospitalized? What if I end up having to be away from the Death Note? What if I have to go on a trip? What if I get sent on an errand? He's like, if anything ties any suspicion to me, if I do something that's out of routine and suddenly people stop dying, that's going to immediately point all the fingers in my direction. So that's smart. I mean, I like it. It's a smart, bold strategy. Any date before the end of their predestined lifespan is all right. So this brings up an interesting question that Light establishes, and I feel like it's going to be something that comes back later on. I feel like they're going to tie back to it in this series. But there is the idea, and I'm going to put it down here, that any date, that the date of death in the Death Note must be before their predetermined fate. I hadn't thought about that at all. But that's a really good point because it has to be within the realm of possibility. So if he says they're going to die 112 years from now, most humans don't live 112 years. So would that work? If he said they're going to die 112 years from now, would that not work because it's not possible? So he asks this question to Ryuk, and Ryuk's like, well, Shinigami never use it that way, so I can't say for sure. But in theory, any time before their natural deaths should be all right. So, and then Light's like, you're not much help. My feelings for Ryuk, if I feel bad for anybody in this series overall, it is Ryuk. Ryuk did ask for this. He did drop the death note there wanting someone to pick it up. It just happened to be Light. But man, I feel like that was very helpful though. I feel like that was really helpful to Light because yeah, it makes sense. Ryuk's like, none of the Shinigami use the death note that way. They don't try. They want to take life away from people, but they also can know when people's lifespans end because Light doesn't have the Shinigami eyes. He doesn't know. So he's like, well, you've kind of got the handicap in this situation. If you just took the eyes, you'd be able to use it. Well, you never have this problem. If you were Shinigami, this would never come up because you always know when they're going to die, so you can calculate how much life to take away from them. Because Light doesn't have that ability, this is like a big question mark. Like, so I think that at some point in this series, he's going to try to kill someone or use the death note to kill someone, and Ryuk's not going to tell him, but that person was scheduled to die before the death scheduled by Light, and it's not going to work. It's going to cancel itself out. And then what's going to happen? So I'm hoping that ends up coming back and coming full circle for us, but I don't know if it will or not. I do not know. But it's interesting, and my dog is like sitting on my cardigan now that I've tossed in the trash. So we have our ice cream cones in the hamper. I like that trash is focused on in this episode. We'll talk about the camera, the mini TV that they paid 39,000 yen for at the end of this episode. That 39,000 yen is like what? The conversion rate, it's like $1. Right now, the inflation is like $1.22 is 1,000 yen. So it's basically like a $400 mini TV. But considering inflation back in 2007, it might be more expensive than that. So, I mean, to that $400 back in 2007 is probably like what, $600 or $800 now. That's an expensive TV just to make a point, right? But Light, our posh boy, he's upper middle class. Spend that money. So yeah, Ryuzaki. Ukita at the MPA has received a phone call he's concerned about. So the MPA, I don't know what MPA stands for, but I'm assuming that, I don't want to look it up either because I'm afraid it's going to be spoilerish, but I'm going to guess it has something to do with like a missing persons thing or something with the police. But so basically the police or NPA, whatever that equates to, is a phone call they are concerned about. Okay, Ukita at the MPA. All right, was Akita one of the ones that was with them? Okay. Have him give the telephone number of number 5. So they all have numbers. They're numbered. Then have him give the telephone number of number 5 and have the informant call that number. Okay, so it's just a web. It's a web of people with aliases calling various phones and nothing traces back easily. And that's really smart on L's part because he's like, I don't want things to trace back with ease. I want it to be complicated. And he's like, Matsuda, you can turn your cell phone on. I mean, please turn it on. Yeah. So L tries to be polite at first. He's like, oh, you can turn it back on. By which I mean, go ahead and do that. Yeah, because he's going to have the number call. And man, that old big box Nokia, you could use that as a defense weapon. That's what I had growing up. And then he's like, deep. And he's like, this is Suzuki, head of the Public Information Processing Unit for the Kira case. Suzuki, yeah. So he just instantly dons this alias. It's great. Like, just like it's nothing. I like that Matsuda's like, you took my phone. And then Pinbur's fiance, Naomi Mizora. I've heard that name somewhere. Naomi Mizora. And then he's like, yes. From the Los Angeles BB murder case. So, we have L recognizing her from the LA BB murder case. So Elle remembers her from 2 years ago. Okay. And then basically, he says, so that's it. She worked under me on that case, and now she's in Japan. Uh-huh. And then he's like, oh, that line, that look in his eye. Yeah, she's been missing since the death of her fiancé. Okay, so, and she was reported missing. Here's what I'm talking about. I've been saying for the last several episodes that, and I've had a lot of people in the comments say that it doesn't matter about the families of criminals or the families of people that Light kills. Well, yeah, it does matter, because I'm pretty convinced that the whole reason, because Light wrote in the death note, he was like, oh, her body won't be inconvenienced to be found. Like, she'll just go commit suicide. But here's the thing. Light, this entire series, has not cared about the family or people connected to the ones that he's murdered, whether they were criminals or whether they were the FBI agents. Like, he didn't care about Ray. He knew Ray had somebody they cared about that was probably his wife or girlfriend, didn't care, and so still killed Ray anyway. And then that girlfriend, who happened to be FBI, became a potential threat to Light, and Light hadn't considered that. He killed her anyway, but she has family too. So I'm sure that her family realized that she was in Japan and went missing, and they contacted the police and said, hey, we don't know where our daughter is. Help us find her. And then that got to the police, which got back to Elle. They suspected it might be a Kira thing. So Light is not considering the trajectory that these deaths could have. Now, are all of the criminals' families going to go to the police and link them? Absolutely not. But in this case, because it's the FBI, because it was Ray and Naomi, and they were tied to this case, that, yeah, it had an impact. So I was waiting for this to all start to come back around. And that's the thing. Yeah, that's what basically have led them to even suspect Light, was the whole thing with Naomi. Mm-hmm. And so they suspect suicide, and then Elle, and here's the other thing, the relationship that Elle knew her character. He knew how she was. And Light did not consider that, even after she said that she trusted Elle and had worked with him. Didn't consider that because, because he's kind of a sociopath. He doesn't consider those emotions, right? Those connections. He just doesn't, right? And it's just a fact of this series. Light, throughout this whole series, has not shown, he's kind of been a sociopath. He's not really cared about anybody's emotional connection to other people. Like the whole thing with Yuri and using her for the date, he has not once brought her back up or considered how she's been impacted by witnessing this death. He didn't care about Ray's family, didn't care about Naomi's, has shown no interest. And why would he, right? Why would he? Because they're just enemies. He's not looking at them as people, right? But it's all starting to come back around. And Elle, in this sense, does know people and does connect to their character and how they think and function. So Elle has a sense of empathy there. Light does not. Light does not show any empathy towards the people in this. The only people he remotely shows any empathy towards is his sister and maybe his mom and him. And now that Alexander, now that you mention it, I was dogging on you at the start of this episode, but now that you mention it, we don't really see much with Light and his dad, but there wasn't anything to suspect that he wouldn't have empathy towards his dad. He does make that comment that he clearly cares about his dad because he doesn't want him to die. So, the only ones that Light really shows any empathy towards are his family. And that's pretty much it. Everybody else he doesn't seem to care about. But yeah, but Elle seems to he's like, and maybe it's not empathy, but let me rephrase that. Maybe it's not empathy, but maybe it's that Elle cares and observes character. And I don't know if Light doesn't. It's just, it's complicated, right? But I'm sure people will agree and disagree with that. But I figured that something like this would happen where her family would report her missing, and here we are. And he's like, no, she would be thinking of catching Kira. So if she was here, if she was with Pinber, so she might have found a clue and end up getting, and if that's the case, did Kira get to her first? Yes, absolutely. And so at this point, he's like, from now on, we'll focus our investigation on the people Ray Pinber was investigating while in Japan. He was investigating 2 people in relation to police. That so narrows it down. It's just 2 families. That's it. I thought that Ray would have like a list of like a dozen people he'd been following, and Light just happened to be like high up on his list because he's the chief's son. You would expect him to look first, but no, he had like just 2 families. And this is where things get so fascinating. He's like, who are those 2? And he's like, they are Deputy Director General Kitamura and his family, and Detective Superintendent Yagami and his family. And oh my God, Soichiro's face. He's like, my family? Really? What? I also wish to place wiretaps and surveillance cameras in both households. Yeah. Elle's like, we're treating this as a serious case. I have to make he's like, we have to cover all bases. He's like, at this point, we have narrowed it down that Ray is a potential person. We've seen he has the envelope. We've seen that things are suspicious with him. He's clearly someone we need to be observing. So, and now Naomi's gone missing, so we need to tie back to anybody he's investigating, which is Light and the other guy, Kitamura. So, while he's doing this, Light's like, I have to make sure this computer is clean in case anybody examines it. So it's just like, just taking preparations. So Elle is making preparations to observe both these families and try and narrow it down, and Light is trying to erase any evidence that could tie back to himself. So just in case anything happens, I have to hide a clipping of the death note in here. Okay, so he took a clipping of it, and is he hiding it in his coat? Is he hiding it in his, like, what pouch is that? He, like, puts a piece of the death note, I guess, in his pocket of his coat so he can pull it out at any time if he needs to have it. It's interesting that Light's, like, taking pieces of the death note out. Again, I keep thinking that a piece of the death note is going to fall out, or it's somehow going to get into someone else's hands. We don't know. And I like Ryuk's like, you sure are skillful with your hands. You popular with the girls, huh? I'm like, Ryuk, you've been on this planet for how many weeks and you're already making sexual innuendo jokes with Light? And Light's like, this has nothing to do with skill. It's more about looks than skill. He just dismisses him. And then he's like, Ryuk, you aren't popular, are you? Like, there needs to be a counter on the show of just how many times Light shits on Ryuk. He does it like 3 times in this episode. This is the 2nd time. But he's just like, you aren't popular, are you, Ryuk? I'm like, leave. I feel like that meme, that boy that's under the bedcloth, it's like, leave Brittany alone. I'm like, leave Ryuk alone. Just give him his apples, damn it. And then Ryuk's like, oh. So they're like, surveillance cameras, that's out of the question. It would become a civil rights issue if we're discovered and we'll all be fired. So, which is true. This is a really, really risky move. Like, it's bold. It's like, yeah, it's a civil rights thing. Like, if you're just invading personal space and privacy, like putting him in the toilets, everything. He's like, you're doing a lot of risk here, and if it gets out, they could all be fired and lose their jobs. But Elle's like, you said you were willing to risk more than your jobs taking on this case. Like, this is the biggest crime of our lifetimes. This is the biggest case of our lifetimes in finding Kira and exposing him. It's like, we have to do this at this point. We've got no other leads. He's like, I thought you said you were going to put your lives on the line. He's like, I'm putting my life on the line. Are you all going to do the same? I mean, it's... And then Chief Yagami, what is the possibility that Kira is among them? And he really went a lot lower than I thought. He said 10%, no, 5%. That's it. There's a 95% chance that Kira is not among any of them. Which I'm curious. I'm going to get my phone calculator out here. Let's say, for example, I'm very curious. So you have 4 in the Yagami household, and let's say, we don't know how many are in the Kitamura household, but let's just say if there were, I'm going to put this out here. So 1 divided, if there's 8 in the household, that's a 12% chance. So if there were 9, that's an 11% chance. Okay. So, I mean, it's pretty much, I was like, if there's a 1 in 9 chance, that's 11%. So if there's 1 in 8 chance, like 2 households of 4 individuals, that's like a 12% chance. So, yeah, so he's really saying that, no, there's not really a big chance. It's very slim. We're risking all this on a very slim margin. And then Matsuda's like, for only 5%, the possibility is too much. And that's when Yagami says, no, of the people that we've investigated so far, there wasn't anyone who even seemed the least bit suspicious. I think we should look into it, even if there's only a 1% chance of finding Kira. And he's like, I never thought my family was under suspicion. Fine, place them. Oh, God. Chief Yagami, he has so much faith. Here's the thing. This is what's curious. Does he have so much faith? It's either one of two things, right? Either with Chief Yagami, it's either one of two things. Either he wants to erase any doubt. I mean, I think this is the main thing. He wants to erase any doubt that it's his family. He wants his family left out, and he wants to erase any possibility of it being them. And he has faith that it's not. Or he is suspicious, but I don't think it's this. I do not think that he's suspicious of his son. I think that he does not believe that any of them are Kira, and he wants to remove all doubt and get his family off the slate. And he knows how thorough that L is, and he's like, okay, L, if we convince you that my family's not it, we'll leave them alone. Okay, but it's so bold. Like he's so driven by that sense of justice. That Chief Yagami is so driven by that sense of justice and like, no, we've come this far. We've turned over every other stone. We might as well turn over these stones too to just make sure and check all possible avenues. And so he's like, do the bathroom, every ounce, the bathroom, the toilet. They get a lot of cameras up in an afternoon. I'll say that. Watari knows how to wiretap because 64 cameras in a bedroom, that is, Watari's been around the block a few times. The man can work some cable. And they just can't believe he said yes. Don't you have a wife and daughter? Yeah, he's like, you're putting in the bathroom with your kids. And he's like, I know, but there's no point in doing this unless we're thorough. He's like, be quiet. Like you can tell it is killing him to even suspect his family. So yeah, I don't think he thinks that Light's suspicious. I think he wants to believe that his family, that there's no chance that his family are related to the killer. And so he's like, no. But ever since episode 1, like ever since episode 2 or 3, when they proved that the killer was in Kanto, we always get images of Chief Yagami being like suspecting, like, because if there's some case you don't want your family to be involved in, there is a little part of you that's like, there's no way, right? And so I think it's crazy to watch him go through this. That he clearly doesn't suspect his family, but he has to be thorough. And so he's taking a big risk. He's doing something that could potentially like get his wife angry at him, expose his kids. And so I like that after this, and they're just like stunned by him. And they're like, we're sorry. And he's like, no, it's okay. He's like, I'm sorry. And at that point, that's when Elle kind of moves over. Also, a lot of you in the Discord have been talking about how Elle's kind of gross. I think it's mainly with the feet on the hotel carpet. Here, he's still barefoot, and the bottoms of his feet are black. It's a little gross. Just a wee bit. But he says, out of courtesy, only Yagami and I will conduct surveillance on his home. And Watari, how long will it take to set up the wiretaps and camera monitors? And he says, starting tomorrow, I can set them up anytime once we know both families will be out. Watari's just like chopping to it. But I do like that Elle is like, okay, we'll only monitor Yagami's family. Only I and him will, just to be considerate, to be courteous. Mm-hmm. But that image of him, I want to take a picture of that image of him, like up against the corner with the light on, like on one side of him shadows and the other side of him the light. And just, oh my God, just a man that's like, he wants to rule out any suspicion on his family, but in doing so, he has to place suspicion on his family. It's like, oh, I don't envy him. Like that's such a hard position to be in. Oh, but yeah. So then we cut back to the house and he goes back home and red flag number 1 is that the door's locked. Nobody's home yet. So he gets the key. I will give Light all the credit. This plan of how to detect if somebody infiltrated the house, and he's been doing it all along, is so genius. I love it. I love that we cut back and forth to the cameras, and it's just like that clicky, staticky, like, but he notices with the handle being all the way up that even though the slip of paper is in place, he knows that they came in the door. Okay, and that the pencil lead was broken. Yeah, he knows it. Now, Ryuk was with him. At first, I was like, did Ryuk not notice anything? But he was with him the whole day, so he wouldn't have noticed them placing the cameras. It would have been funny if Ryuk had stayed home and Watari and had been watching Watari. That would have been fun. But no, he's been with Light this whole time because they didn't suspect that anybody tapped the house until he saw the door handle. So I give props to Light for having this whole setup, having like the thing with the door handle and the lead and the paper from the start. I really liked that. And of course, Light can't talk to them, to Ryuk, right? Ah. And so then, yeah, he walks back out. And so they look at the video footage of him leaving the paper. And so this is interesting. This is interesting. So we cut back to the video footage of Chief Yagami and L looking at Light placing the paper. And Yagami's like, I can't believe that my son would do this to make sure nobody snuck into his room. Like, could he have something in his room that he doesn't want anyone to see? But L says, if you keep in mind that he's only 17, then there's nothing suspicious about his behavior. And I'm like, oh, interesting. He's like, just what a 17-year-old would do. He's like, I also did that for no apparent reason. Okay, so L is not 17 anymore. L is older. At least we've established that L is older. At least we have that confirmation. L is older than 17. And supposedly human. But he says that he was cautious, just like Light was. So, whereas Chief Yagami is somewhat suspicious, it's like, why would my kid go to such lengths to... And then when we tie back to the dirty magazine, maybe that was why, but maybe he figures that. But Chief Yagami is kind of like, this is weird. And L's like, not really. Like, if he's a cautious person like me, I did the same thing. But that also ties to the fact that I don't know if L realizes, and maybe he does, that way back a few episodes ago, he was like, oh, well, Kira is childish just like me. So I wonder if L is aware that he's making these comparisons with Light just like he made with Kira. If he's aware of that or not. Mm-hmm. So he, of course, asks Yagami if he's ever talked about the investigation. And Yagami's like, no, I never talked to him. He's like, and that's when he talks about not being home regularly. When I do, I'm tired, I just go to sleep. And he's like, I understand. So that's curious too. And so Chief Yagami regrets that he's come home and not spent time with his son. Right? He's regretting that. And L says he understands. So I don't know if L understands that from the perspective of he had a kid himself that was maybe killed, that he understands that whole idea of being away from home and being busy and not spending time with their family. Or it may not even be a kid. It may be that he's just been away from home and then come home late and not seen his family at all, whether it's a mother, a father, Watari, anything like that. But he seems to empathize with Chief Yagami. And again, Light's so smart. He's making sure he's not tapped. So he checks like his pockets and everything to make sure that he doesn't have a tap on any of his clothing. It's great. And I love that Ryuk is just like doing this weird dance to try to get Light's attention. I freaking love Ryuk. I say that every episode, but my love for Ryuk only grows as the series grows because he's such a freaking delight. I love Ryuk. And he's like, there's a possibility that there are wiretaps or surveillance cameras within the house. Like, he figures it out pretty quick. And so then he goes through the whole ordeal about how he knows that it's happened. And I will say this. There are a few times in this episode that the animation on Ryuk's face is a little weird. It's a little funky, and I don't know if they just gave up. They were like, it's fine. Or if in the manga it looks weird. It could be in the manga that it looks odd, and then translating this into the episode just kind of seems odd. But yeah, he goes to the lead thing, all of that. And then we establish, okay, what happens? Light's like, now wait a minute. What happens if you eat apples on the security camera? And so I like this misdirect. I like that we think that Light is purchasing a book on research and wiretap and surveillance, but Light's intelligent. He doesn't need such things. He's getting a dirty magazine so that he can trick and just poke fun at L, right? And it's even the bag. It's very Sasaki to Miyano, the way it's in that bag. I'm like, oh God, what a crossover. What if Light was in the same world as Sasaki and Miyano? And instead of, what if Miyano got the death note? We could go down a rabbit hole. We're not going to do that. But I'm just saying, Miyano got the death note would be some scary stuff. But yeah, him getting the hentai magazine or the swimsuit magazine. He says, what happens if you eat apples on the surveillance camera? And Ryuk's like, oh, well, yeah, if it's in my mouth, nobody's going to be able to see it. But it'll look like it's just floating in the air if I'm holding it. And he's like, yeah. And I just love how Light's like, well, Shinigami can't die, so they won't starve either. And Ryuk's like, wait, what? No. He's like, no. Like, you can automatically see he knows where Light's going with this. Also, the bangle bracelet that's on Ryuk's wrist, I'm just now noticing it, are little faces around it. That's so creepy. But yeah, he's like, wait, no. And he's like, in other words, there's no problems if I don't give you any apples. And he's like, no, just wait a minute, Light. I love that that's where he crosses the line. He's like, no, just hold on. We don't have to get desperate here. We don't have to go to extremes. He's like, apples are what cigarettes and liquor are to humans. He's like, this is my crack. You can't take it away. I'll get withdrawal symptoms if I don't have any. And he's like, what's the symptoms? He's like, my body twists around wildly and I'll do handstands. I don't want to see that. That's possibly the funniest thing is the manga, because like, what would withdrawals for a Shinigami be like? And it's just as ridiculous as you think it would be. But here's my thing. Light, you done goofed. You gave L the hint that Shinigami love apples. So again, we're tying back to like, L, Light, why did you do that? So Light gave the hint way back when during the game that gave the hint to L about the apples. Yeah. So he's like, shit, now I can't, if he sees an apple floating, he's going to put 2 and 2 together and be like, Shinigami, what's going on here? Something's connected to Kira. Even if L doesn't know to connect Shinigami to the Death Note or to Kira, he knows that Kira's talked about Shinigami and apples, and that will instantly tie Light to him. But here's what I think is going to happen. He's not letting Ryuk have any apples. Ryuk is going through some serious withdrawals. He is not. I would let Ryuk have some apples but they just float around. So that's true. Ryuk hasn't been eating apples around anybody except Light. So in public, if he gave him an apple and he was holding onto it, people would be able to see a floating apple. That's a good point. I would just get some apples and like go to a dark alley somewhere and be like, here you go, Ryuk, have some apples to fix your withdrawal while I'm dealing with this. But he's not. So what I think is going to happen is at some point Ryuk is going to be like, Ryuk's going to flip. He's like, I need it. I need it. And he's going to go into the kitchen or something and eat an apple or take it from the sister or something. And it's going to get caught on camera. I think that it's going to get caught on camera and it's going to be Ryuk's fault. But then again, maybe not. So far, things have worked into Light's favor, so I could be wrong. But that's just such a moment to backslide against Light. He's like, if you really want apples. And then I love the composition of if you want apples, and then Ryuk like lands behind him and there's this dramatic gust of wind and Ryuk's like wings fly out. It's amazing. He's like, if you want apples, find where the cameras are. Like, just using him. It's great. There might be a place where you can eat apples without being seen. Such a tease. Being like, well, maybe you can find a blind spot where you can eat the apples. And he's like, oh. I figured that he was using Ryuk to find the blind spot so they could be somewhere where he could go and not be seen. But I don't know if that's the case, right? I'm not sure if that's what's happening or not. But it's interesting that he uses Ryuk in that moment. Very interesting. So, yeah. Let me get out of this and go back to the episode. Okay. So then, yeah, we get next to this, and Ryuk's like, oh, find the cameras. And he's like, let's go, Ryuk. He's like using Ryuk like a dog. He's like, go. He like uses him like a canine dog. Like, sniff out the cameras. Go find them. I'll give you your apples. Like, Light is just so apt on using this Shinigami. He's like, this is also interesting. And what's fun about that moment there is that Light's ego, he's like, I'm using a literal death god as like a drug sniffing dog, right? And Light just believes he's just controlling Ryuk. But that one moment where Ryuk goes, "This is also interesting," is curious. It establishes that Ryuk is still somewhat in control of the situation and is just doing what Light asks him to do, mainly because he wants apples, but just to see what will happen when he discovers the cameras. So, But yeah, so this part here is interesting with the Death Note, how to use it. A person can shorten his or her own life by using the note. So that's something. So if somebody decides that they want to shorten their own lifespan, they can. That's chilling in a way, because that is suggesting that at some point, someone who has used the Death Note may have used it in a way that they regret. And it's basically how they commit suicide. They're like, they can kill themselves using the Death Note, is what it amounts to. And I feel like when Ryuk back in episode 1 was like, the pain and suffering you'll find using the Death Note, it's like, yeah, I'm sure a lot of users before Ryuk or another Shinigami could write their name down used it against themselves. So that's interesting. And then the other note is something that we've heard from a previous episode, which is the fact that the human who becomes the owner of the Death Note can, in exchange of half of his or her remaining life, get the eyeballs of the god of death, which will enable him or her to see a human's name and remaining lifespan when looking through them. It's curious, it doesn't talk about, exchange for half of his or her life. So that caveat is listed there. So yeah, I love that Ryuk is like, what you doing there, Light? I love that. That panel of Ryuk where he has like the sketchy like Kirishiro on his face. I imagine in the manga that's just like this big dramatic panel. But also interesting. He's like, oh right, I have to find the cameras. It's like, I can't believe my diligent son is looking at a magazine like that. I love the whole time that L's trying to find anything. He's just like, I love how he just like distorts his mouth with the thumb. Oh, it's good. But yeah, Chief Yagami like, my son looking at porn? And then L's like, it's normal for a 17-year-old. Did L look at porn? He's like, but to me it seems like he's making an excuse, as if to say, I was checking to see if someone was in this room because I have magazines like these. So yeah, Ryuzaki is like, L's saying, that's pretty normal for a 17-year-old, but it's almost too normal for Light. It's like, we've been watching this diligent son of yours. It seems a little too normal. Like, the way that he's positioned himself where the camera can see exactly what's in the magazine, he's like, it seems a little much. And that's when Yagami's like, do you suspect my son? And I'm glad that L's honest. He's like, yeah, I suspect everyone. That's why we're doing this investigation. He's like, I do suspect him. He's like, that's why we place wiretaps and cameras in both of your houses. I suspect everybody. And so then he's like, I found a camera in the air conditioner. And Light's like, yep. I love the look on his face where he's just, and Ryuk's just, like, Ryuk's looking like train spotters just up on the ceiling. Oh my God. He says, I can't believe the Japanese police would go this far. Well, yeah, they're trying to find Kira. This is L's doing. And if that's the case, how far has he narrowed it down to? He must be down to at least someone that Ray Pinber was investigating, or he would never have gone this far. Yeah, tricked by the cover again. In this case, I should act as if I was the only one being suspected and being watched. It'll be all right. I've been preparing for something like this. That's why I got these magazines. So he only bought the one magazine. He only bought the one magazine that day. So he's been leading up to this suspecting that something like this could happen. Because Light is super diligent and super prepared, right? But yeah, him putting it back in the bookcase. And the dad being like, it's just that disappointing father face where he's like, Light. I'm amazed that he's so disappointed because he has porn. It's great. And then, of course, the sisters like come down for dinner. I love this like hyper stylized romance drama that's playing on the TV, like with all the. It looks like the OP where the girl is wandering in the rain and she reaches her hand out to Light and he reaches his hand back. That's what it looks like. She looks like the girl version of this guy. And then the woman has the umbrella. I should just drops the umbrella in the rain. I love it. And so, and the guy, yeah. And then the sister says, Hideki Ryuga, you're so dreamy. There's nobody in my class like him, nobody at all. Which she's like a middle school kid, so of course there's not. And I love she's like, say you, eat your dinner. Okay. And so I like that it's really kind of sad that Chief Yagami gets to see his family like eating their dinner like this, and he's not there. And he's getting to see his family, like what their life is like without him there. It's kind of sad, honestly. And so then L checks up and says, Mr. Aizawa, are the Kitamuras watching TV right now? And he says, yes. Aside from the deputy general director, the four of them are watching. Okay, so there is 5. So there's 5 in the family. Aside from the deputy director, the 4 of them are watching TV. Okay, so we have 9 total. So he's saying, or 8. Well, no, there's 8 because he's not investigating the chief in there. So yeah, it's still 12%. Interesting. Okay. It's channel 4. And he's like, put the banner across there. So yeah, and this part is interesting because L tries to out during this whole thing with the guy with the bottle of wine and everything. In response to the Kira murders, the ICPO has decided to dispatch 1,500 investigators. So they do the 1,500 investigator line from various developed countries to Japan. Mm-hmm. And so this part, Light just can't resist. He's like, he knows that there's cameras in the living room, and he knows that it's probably L trying to get a reaction out of Light, right? And so it's the same trick you used the first time. Yeah. And so, you know, Light, what you could have done, you could have been like, oh, that's interesting. I hope they catch him or something like that. But no, he has just enough of an ego that he wants to throw it back at L, but do so in a way that would not draw suspicion to him under normal circumstances, unless you're like L and you're kind of obsessed with the idea of Kira. And he says the ICPO is stupid. Because, yeah, he's like, there's no point in making this announcement. Why wouldn't you come in secret? Yeah, you should come and investigate them in secret. Even those FBI agents investigating in secret were killed. The outcome will be the same. This is just an overblown attempt to shock Kira into exposing himself. It might be completely obvious to Kira. And I love these. Just like, L's just like, they're on to each other, right? They're just on to each other. Yeah. And there's this like obsession. I will say, I think L is much more obsessed with Light than Light is obsessed with L at this point in time. I think that Light is in like preservation mode and is more concerned with trying to cover his bases and cover his ass and keep himself secret. So he doesn't really have time to obsess on L, but L is like hardcore, like obsessed with the Kira case. And by obsessed with Light, I mean obsessed with the Kira case and trying to blow it open. And the entity Kira itself is an obsession for L. But that, oh my gosh, that whole thing with the finger in his mouth, like just looking, he looks like just a cat. Oh, it's great. Mm-hmm. He's like, your son's very smart. And he's like, oh, well, yeah, you know. And then he goes to the bag of potato chips. Uh-huh. You look so fit right now. Do you want to get fat? Oh, my God. But, yeah. And oh, my God. And poor Ryuk is short-circuiting. He's like, Light, please. I found all the cameras. Give me the apples. Even the Shinigami get tired when they try hard. I can't get over just how he's just like, please, the apples. It's a bit complex, so pay attention. I don't want to explain it again. And he just ignores him. Again, that's the third time. Like Ryuk's like, I need you to listen to me. And Light's like, nope. So there are cameras just literally everywhere. Amazingly. Yeah, cameras everywhere. It's a good thing. Again, the fortune favors Light in so many senses of the word, because he had enough time before they found out that they wanted to investigate him. He had enough time to write all those names in the death note. It's kind of crazy. It's amazing that there's not a camera. There are cameras in the drawers and cameras at the keyboard, everything, but there is not a camera that... Is there not a camera that's going to see that the book literally says Death Note? Because he has the paper. He says it's definitely L. He had no qualms putting a death row inmate in his place when he challenged me. Yeah, that's true. L's not afraid to get bold, too. He knows no limits. So where am I going to eat? He's like, so where am I going to eat apples in this situation? Obviously, that's impossible, Ryuk. Oh, yeah, you can't talk to me in the house. Well, we'll just talk. Yeah, this one scene, Ryuk's facial animation looks like something off of Aw, Real Monsters. It's pretty terrifying. Tell me when we go outside. Aww. He's like, got this one right. Like, just like, shut up. Judging from the number of cameras, he's planning on making his decision in a short amount of time. A normal person would probably give himself away. I love it. He's like, you're messing with the wrong person. He's like, I'm not normal. So that is the thing. Light puts on a persona of being this perfectly normal, everyday schoolboy, but in his mind, he believes he's like a god. Ryuzaki has just this weird kind of eccentric persona, but is it a persona? Is it how he really is? How does he really view himself? That's the question. I feel like L does view himself as really intelligent, but this is as far as he'll get. And then the most dramatic chip opening bag scene in anime history. He's like, this is as far as he'll get. And he's like, cha! And doing his master plan. And then that laugh, that Miyano Mamoru laugh of just him with the chip bag. And Ryuk is just dying. Ryuk's dying in the floor. But it's the camera. I thought it was like, at first I thought it was like a camera in a wiretap within the bag of chips. And I'm like, how did that happen? And why are you exposing this wiretap? And why are you laughing about it? It's not. It's the micro TV. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, the criminals I wrote down are going to die over the next couple weeks. But Kira has already shown L that he can control the time of death. And then Ryuk's just convulsing. So the current criminals being broadcast on the news have to die while I'm not receiving any knowledge of them. And that's where he get the idea of the camera. He's like, oh no, my withdrawal symptoms! And so I love that everything gets intense and shaky cam while we see Ryuk's feet flying up in the air to do the handstand. And meanwhile, Light is writing in the Death Note the names of these guys that he's seeing through. It's the most chaos in this show so far. And it's the most bizarre thing because you have this intense moment of him just like ripping open the bag of chips, writing the names. Ryuk's legs are flailing in the air. And meanwhile, he takes the most dramatic bite of a chip while masquerading as a regular high school student. He's like, I'll solve equations with my right hand and write names with my left. Oh my God. And this line, grab a potato chip and eat it. What the hell is this episode? What is this? It's ridiculous. I love it. As Ryuk is just having withdrawals and going crazy. It's just the best thing in the world. I cannot. Nope. And all of this manic stuff is going on, you see the camera in reverse angle and you just see him like eating from a bag of chips and it's angled to where you can't see the TV within the bag. Wow. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, after dinner, your son has continued studying without turning on a television or computer, hasn't he? And he's like, oh, the entrance exams are less than 10 days away. And he's like, yeah, I love this. Where L's just like, something's off. Something's too perfect. And so then, yeah, Light's like, okay, with this moment, I'm going to eliminate witness to my alibi is L himself. And then he throws it in the trash, but I'm like, it's amazing. He thinks that trash will never be found again, but I'm like, I don't know. L has shown that he will go to great lengths to get information. And so I'm like, I don't even know if I'd trust the trash man at this point. The fact that he put 64 cameras in your own bedroom seems a bit suspicious. So, and then Chief Yagami's like, oh shit, well, it's Kira. During that time in your home, your wife and daughter were watching a drama. And he says, as soon as that was finished, they turned off the television and didn't watch anything afterwards. and your son from 7:30 until 11 o'clock has done nothing but study. Kira needs a name and a face to kill. Yep. Those who did not watch the news can't be Kira, huh? It's like, yeah. And he's like, this means my family's innocent, right? And he's like, Kira killed many people with minor crimes as soon as they were broadcast, didn't he? Mm-hmm. He's like, yes. Even if it is the first day the cameras were installed, the Yagami household is so clean, it's almost funny. He's like, it's too clean, it's too perfect. And I know, and the look on Chief Yagami's face, he's like, well, aren't you gonna leave my family alone now? We proved they're innocent. And L's like, L's like, it's too perfect. He's like, something's not right. He's like, everything's going so perfectly to erase. There's no suspicion here. He's like, it's almost too clean. He's like, yeah, he's like, we just installed cameras today, but nothing of any suspicion has happened. He's like, it's almost as if they're purposefully trying to erase any suspicion. He's like, just, and that look of obsession on Elle's face. Yeah, nah, It's oof. And so then, yeah, he says he's up. Today is trash day, so bring out any garbage you have. What a pain. I always say you should be doing this without me reminding you. Yeah. And then, of course, Light's like, what a beautiful day! I've beat L! I've cracked the code where everything's fine. It's like, I don't know if you'll do just about anything if it's for yourself, or if you're just a big spender. But didn't that mini LCD TV cost 39,000 yen? So basically like $400. Yep. Worth it to not be caught as a killer. Worth it to save your life. And he makes sure that the garbage like leaves. Oh my gosh. So, no, I don't think that Elle is done investigating the Yagami family. Things are too perfect. I think that Elle wants to keep the cameras there a couple more days to completely erase all possible odds. Because he's like, nah, things are too perfect. It's too easy. It's too easy to say that there's no suspicion, right? It's too convenient. So Elle's like, we're not just going to give up after one day. We're going to do it for a little while. And it's fine. So I don't know. There are some big questions on this. And my questions as far as for the next episode would be, so Chief Yagami, our poor chief, like, how is this affecting him? Because he's basically putting his family, like, in front of the guillotine, being like, no, they're innocent, they're fine. He's putting his family on trial, I guess, not in front of the guillotine, more on trial in this, being like, no, they're innocent. I do believe at the end of this, by the end of this episode, I do believe that Chief Yagami thinks that his family is innocent. I don't think he suspects Light. I think he's disappointed in Light because he looked at the porno magazine, but I don't think that he suspects him as being Kira because he seemed very eager to try to be like, okay, they're innocent, right? Everything's fine, right? This proves they're not the killers, right? So I'm concerned about Chief Yagami's like mental state in all of this because he's not been getting sleep. He probably feels guilty about not being home with his family as much. Now he's going to feel guilty because he like put wiretaps in their house to prove it wasn't them. It's putting him in a bad position. L, I think, is obsessed over Kira. Is obsessed with the Kira case, and he's not going to stop until he rules out all possible doubt. Ryuk, I am pretty sure, is having apple withdrawals. And I feel like he's going to try to get an apple and sneak it into some point where it's but it's like, if he gets the apple, it's going to be caught on camera. So even if he goes to a blind spot, they're going to see the apple floating, right? So, but I feel like Ryuk is going to cave. I feel like Light, you should find a dark alley somewhere and give him some apples so he's okay. But yeah, there's that. I don't know. There's all of that. And then with Light seems pretty convinced by the end of this episode that he is okay, but I don't know. I feel like Light has put two and two together. The Ray Pinber thing, they've reached him through that, but I don't know if he's even taken Naomi into account at this point. I don't know, but Oh my God, this episode was so good. It was so good. And it's the only thing I'm really rooting for with Light at this point is I don't want him to get caught because I want to see the cat and mouse between him and Elle keep going. But I'm like, where do we go to? That's what's been so much fun about these episodes is that you don't know where it's going. And then like with Light, the whole thing with the door and the lead and the handle, I didn't see that coming at all. That was so genius. And him like trying to get a goat out of Elle and Elle being obsessed. Like it's fantastic. And I'm kind of obsessed with this show now. So there we go. But no spoilers, please. But I am curious to know your thoughts down below. What you all thought of this episode. I'm very curious. Please no spoilers or tag them down below. Be like, Romania, please don't read. And then other than that, I'm really excited for episode 9. I may record a little bit ahead because I'm going to be out of town next weekend. So I may record just a little bit ahead just so that I don't have to worry about it while I'm on vacation. But I'm taking the weekend off. So I may watch episode 9 ahead. So it may be shorter because I won't have as many comments to go off of. But we shall see. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And yeah, I'll be back next week with episode 9 of Death Note. Bye.